Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Alice, for that wonderful introduction. I am a sculptor who works with social issues. However, my work is developed so that it exists on its own merit aesthetically. I work with 8-quarter sugar pine, which I laminate to get wider pieces or thicker pieces. Sometimes I work in a series, sometimes I just work as individual pieces. Since I do not work overtly, what I do is leave kind of clues as to what each piece is about. And as I go along, I will share these clues with you. And I will also give you an idea of the size of each piece. So first slide, please. Okay, this first group is part of a series. It's called Where Poppies Grow. It deals with the mass movements of people, whether because of conflict, environmental issues, or the seeking of a better life. And this first piece is called Memories. It's 3 feet, and it makes use of this carved vessel, which contains the material possessions of people, as well as the emotional investment in family and home. This vessel shape is carved in such a way that it fits different vessels fit into each other to form the three-dimensional quality. And you will see also tailpipes as part of this series, which indicates the movement, whether it's by cars or buses or even carts. And gloves or shoes, which indicate the human factor. This piece is called Echoes. It's 8 feet, and it indicates the clinging together for strength and safety. You will see that these have a cord which is holding the pieces tightly together as they decide what they're going to be doing. Next slide, please. This is Realities/Delusions. It's also 8 feet, and it emphasizes the long journey, seeking new routes. It tries to simulate perspective a bit by being broader down at the base, and it slowly moves up the wall. Next slide, please. This piece is called Commentaries. It's approximately 4 feet, and it indicates the loss experienced along the journey. The little section up at the top is a group of poppies that are made out of ribbon, and it tries to simulate the little poppies that used to be sold by veterans on Veterans Day. They were made out of, excuse me, They were made out of paper, and they started probably, I think, around World War One. And then on this piece, you will see the ribbons flowing through that tailpipe and puddling onto the pedestal. Next slide, please. This is called Endings/Beginnings. It's approximately 5 feet tall, and it is the hope for the future. It's the coming together of the vessels. And if you were to actually see this piece, you would notice that up in the right-hand corner is some weaving, and it is done with metal strips to indicate the harshness of the journey. And on the right side, the weaving was done with ribbons so that they are soft and hopefully indicates a soft landing for the future. Next slide, please. This next group is called Portfolio because the pieces are individually conceived. And this is Hear My Voice. It is 7 feet tall, and it examines all the roles that women play in our society. Each of these feminine shapes, and there are 5 of them, are split in half, and they have a panel in them which is collaged and indicates some of the things that women do in our society. Also, each of these feminine pieces is on a caster, so that it literally moves and indicates that women are always on the move. Next slide, please. This is a close-up of some of the collages. Next slide, please. This piece is called The Beast Within. It's made up of 2 figures brought together. It's standing on 3 legs. It's 7 feet in length, and it is carved out in the middle section. And the next slide, please. This carved out area has written on it some of the really awful things that have happened throughout history. And it's not that I don't think that you know these things, because I'm sure that you've all studied history. But I'd like you to think in the terms of this piece about how much violence each of us is capable of, which is what I thought about in terms of my making it as I was going along. Next piece, please. This is called Uncertainty Factor. It's approximately 3.5 feet, and it questions the ideal of belonging. I had been to a lecture where the discussion was about if people were within a circle, they all felt that they were part of something. However, the people outside the circle felt that they were not as interesting, they were not being as accepted. And so the idea was to invite them into the circle. Next slide, please. This is the piece open, and it can be hung on a wall, as you see here. And as I was going home from my lecture, I began to think about Hitler's youth and how they were all welcomed into the circle. And I didn't find it very pleasing. So I developed this as a kind of game, which you can play. Each of the round pieces is removable, and it has little sayings on it. And up in the right-hand corner is a kind of clock, and it has a hand on it, which moves because behind it is a little motor, and you can click the motor on and off. Next slide, please. 1 minute. This is called probabilities, 4 feet high. And it looks at the choices that individuals have in developing their own future. Those are hands that are holding the two parts of the figure together, and they are piled one over the other, and they could literally be piled, continue to go until you find what it is that makes you become you. Next slide, please. This is censored. It's 5 feet wide, and it deals with the curbing of the dissemination of vital information to the public. And very often happens during times of war. And you see these carved out individuals who are being pulled together by these wooden ropes. And there are little hands that are pulling the ropes even tighter. Next slide, please. This is called Equal Unequal. It's 2 feet high, and it was developed in relation to school integration, when the courts determined that equal but separate was not acceptable. So these are two figures, one within the other, both being equal. Next slide, please. This is called despoiler. It is approximately 6.5 feet. And most scientists have agreed that climate change is man-made. It is trying to say that we need to do something about it, and possibly with the new law that is coming into being, something will develop. Next slide, please. Sometimes I just work abstractly. So this is taking the same wooden rope and developing it in a linear kind of fashion. And as a result, it creates various negative spaces from all different angles as you would walk around it. Next slide, please. This is called also abstract. It's called Gatherings 5. The idea was, or the challenge actually, that I gave myself was to develop 5 units, each of which was different, but that each of them was the same enough so that the whole piece held together as one sculpture. And here again you see the wooden ropes which are holding each unit together. Next slide, please. The next series is called The Garden because it's ongoing, and it probes the disparities of surface beauty, which mask deeper realities. All of these are based on growth forms. Next slide, please. This is called Temptations, and the floral projections develop the idea that little in life is free. The nipples in the middle of each projection are saying that this is something very desirable that I would like to have, and yet it is surrounded by crushed aluminum pieces, which says that I have to work pretty hard to get through to that part which I would really like to have. Next slide, please. This is Cautionary Tales. It's 7.5 feet. And each plant form is producing flowers of questionable beauty. And it's hoping that you will get very close to it and take a closer look. Next slide, please. This is Pulling Forth. It's 2 feet, and hands are pulling at the strands that are sticking out from the basic mass. And it's seeking a new kind of unconventional thinking. I guess a kind of thinking out of the box. Next slide, please. This is Seeds of Hope. It's 6.5 feet. What seems like a very lyrical plant is actually covered with plastic toy soldiers whose armaments are covered with white flags. With the coloring, I tried to simulate what I saw when I put the television on at the beginning of the Iraq War, where it started at dusk in that light, very dull blue sky, and then the explosions with the red. Next slide, please. This is Sound of Silence, and this was based on the poem that Dorcas read at the beginning. It is 2 feet, and it is by this young woman whose village was totally destroyed, and everyone in the village did not make it. So it has the turmoil, the ground, the messages that are underground, and the trees, which represent the forest. Next slide, please. And this is reaching. It is a little more than 5 feet. It is these sinuous strands of wood weave around each other in pursuit of the ideal of reason rather than combat to settle conflicts. And along these strands are written statements by philosophers and newsmen and poets. And up in the left-hand corner, you will see a bud beginning to open on that hand sort of shape, which indicates that there may just be a possibility of this happening. And that is the end of the presentation. And I think of my voice. So I thank you for your attention.